Crime investigators, what's the creepiest unsolved case you investigated that scares you to this day? Two girls in their 20s round murdered in their car. McDonald's food in their laps. Windows up. Doors locked. No sign of a struggle. Was my last case I ever worked 3 years ago. No suspects have been arrested. Edit. I was an investigator for the medical examiner. My job was to document facts, not solve the crime. Local law enforcement is responsible for the solving. Not a crime investigator, but I had a good buddy that went missing in a cornfield when he was a 2-year-old kid, back in 1980 or 81. Literally thousands of volunteers came out to help search the fields and land around his farm for 2 days, but he was nowhere to be found. They even brought in a psychic. His parents were so desperate. On the 3rd day he was finally found. Quite some distance from where he disappeared. His parents still think to this day that he was abducted, but because of all the media attention and people searching for him, the kidnappers returned him, pretty much just dropping him off and hightailing it out of there. I'm a cop, but this isn't my case. The FBI believes that over nearly 2 decades a trucker or multiple truckers have been killing women and dumping their bodies along their routes. In 2004 an FBI wonk notices a trend of bodies being dumped along a commercial trucking route in the south and submits it to a crime tracking database. Texas analyst picks it up and they find dozens of identical cases. No leads to this day. No suspects. No convictions. I work as an investigator for the county medical examiner. The cases that always creep me out are the Gene and John does, especially the younger ones. How could a family not report a loved one missing for 10, 20 or 30 years? Some of these cases are not suspicious, so it's not like the family is worried about going to prison. We're looking at forensic genealogy to assist with some of the cases. I have a sister who ran away due to addiction problems as a young adult. My mother received a call from the boyfriend's sister saying that she thought that he may have killed my sister but wasn't sure whether they were in the Bay Area or Seattle. He was a real dipshit. My mother and I spent the night calling morgues from San Francisco to Seattle, and the number of unaccounted for young women was truly chilling. I'll never forget that realization that there are so many unclaimed young women in morgues everywhere. Meant to. I'm just speaking to my experience. Side note, she's alive and well and sober these days. Back in the early 80s, a 16-year-old boy was walking home from a party about a mile from his house when he was intentionally hit by a vehicle and dragged by the vehicle before being dumped in front of his house for his father to find his body in the morning. The police say they have suspects but not enough evidence to make any arrests. There are still posters all over the town and surrounding areas with his picture asking for information more than 35 years later. Really a tragic story that needs closure. Edit. This is the Eric Cross case, and I am not an investigator, just a local. In a town close to me, a few years ago a little boy went missing. He was in a foster home with his siblings. There was apparent previous reports from neighbors of them wandering off frequently because they were left alone without food, breaking into garages I think. He was reported missing by the foster mom. She went on TV and everything I think I remember. There was so many search parties. We live in the desert so there's a lot of open land. I stopped hearing things about it. Eventually I asked one of my buddies who works in that PD and he told me they never got any real answers. They found remains years later that they believed to be his in a canal, but it had been so long not much was left. Also they think wild animals had probably spread what was left of the remains around after all these years. Not an investigator. In League City, Texas. There used to be a dead-end road. The city grew like crazy. In the process of clearing land they found dozens of girls buried. Still several unidentified. They stumbled onto the dumping ground for a serial killer. It's called a road if you are familiar with that area. They did a documentary on it at some point. My sister went to prom with a guy who lived next door to this. One night she is over at his house and a random girl comes running. No shows on, screaming, banging on the door saying some guy picked her up or was following her. Boys say the man was nowhere to be found. Prom date and brother get her to safety, then proceed to tell my sister all the weird ghost stories because weird things like that always happen around here. They thought she was spooked by feelings of being watched or something. Until a few years later when they started finding bodies. Again. Guy let his dog out and it came back with a decaying limb. When they went to search they found a makeshift altar. Creepy stuff. At my first apartment, someone was stringing up dogs in the trees behind houses with their throats cut and bled dry. Serial killer behavior, obviously just killing them to kill them. Worked on that case a couple weeks, but after 4 or 5 dogs, it just stopped and my bosses wouldn't let me work on it anymore with all the real crime going on. I still think it was a future serial killer practicing. The Molly Bish case. A 16-year-old girl was dropped off for work at the lake where she was a lifeguard by her mom. She was never seen alive again. This happened in the summer of 2000 in a small town in central Massachusetts, about 30 minutes from where I grew up. I remember seeing missing person signs all over local business when I was a kid looking for Molly. There's a man who comes into the bar I work at every day around 4 PM. He's nice, has a group of other guys he socializes with. His wife comes in every Sunday with him for football season. Their daughter went missing a few years ago. They had a suspect, who my older sister actually dated for a short period. When they couldn't definitively connect him to the case they cut him loose. He's now serving time for a completely separate kidnapping murder. He hasn't confessed to the first one so the couple will never really know if they caught the guy. Everyone just assumes. I don't think the family will ever get closure off of an assumption though. Someone killed 50 dogs and left them on top of parked cars for a year, then it just stopped. For a time my business contracted to a pie company that was made up of part-time police officers. One case they told me about was a guy who simply vanished. Normal life, wife, kids, active in the community, gone out of thin air. Over the years, there were verified sightings of him. There is recording of him over a year later at a bar in Omaha. Bartender happened to be from the area where he disappeared and recognized the guy after he left. Best anyone could tell is that he just wanted a new life and successfully started over. Someone was picking up drunk homeless people in my town, about 20 years back, beating them up and dropping them far from town during the winter season, which can last for about 2 to 8 months and drop as low as -45 Celsius. Edit, few extra details. It was during the mid-1990s, in the Terrace PGPR area. Not sure if it was police or not. Those that live in a small town only how talk gets around. I remember nothing coming from it. It could have been police or just town thugs. It was just kinda scary for us teens at the time. The case of Missy Bevers. Murdered in 2016 as she waited for the arrival of her yoga class. There's video of the suspect in SWAT gear as they're leaving the scene but they've never been caught. In high school I knew a girl through mutual friends in our very small town. She was a freshman and I was a senior. The story goes she was walking home around 1 AM from a community of trailers about 3 miles from town and before leaving called her mom for a ride. Mom was a drug addict and refused to come get her. She never made it home. 5 to 6 years later, I return home from the military and see a newspaper article. Her remains were found wrapped in barbed wire in a canal. The crazy part is that it had to be a local. I know this because where they found her body was a popular swimming spot in the community and was miles from town and on the completely opposite side of town from where she was the night she went missing. No one swims there now and the whole thing is largely forgotten by the community with the exception of those who went to school with her. Mystery was solved a few days after it happened but I figured I would share anyways. In the town I live in there's a rundown motel that all the druggies stay at. Well anyways there was a night that a man walked into and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun and blew the cashier's brains all over the wall. Stole $112 and some change. Obviously a investigation was opened and for 4 days they didn't have any leads or anything. Turns out on the evening of the 4th night they supposedly found the murderer behind the motel in a cornfield in a fetal position just rocking back and forth. If you liked this video, then you might like 911 operators telling of when people creatively asked for help when they couldn't explicitly say that they needed help. If you want to see more content from this channel, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.